nobody's broken, bad, or wrong if they want more or less sex than you do.
Welcome to Sex Talks with Diana, a space where, from sex work to tantra, we tap into raw experiences to uncover how they intersect with sex and sexuality. Because knowledge not only lives in books, we listen to people in their stories. Let's dive in. Today we're talking with Dr. Kate Balestrieri, who is a licensed psychologist, certified sex therapist, certified sex addiction therapist, and PACT couples therapist. She is also the founder of Modern Intimacy, which focuses on mental health, relationships, and sexuality. Kate, welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for inviting me on your show today. I'm really grateful to be here.
Thank you for being with us. So today we're going to be talking about libido. So this is the idea that's going to be... we're going to be coming back to all the time. And I think to start off the conversation, could you define for our audience what libido is?
Sure. The terms libido and sex drive, or your sexual appetite, or your sexual, interest and energy behind that interest, your desire are terms that are really used pretty interchangeably. So, our libido or our drive for sex is typically motivated by a bunch of different things. It can be driven by our hormones, our levels of stress, learned behavior that we've sort of absorbed throughout our life, our brain and sort of neurobiological functioning. Sometimes different medical conditions or medications can have an impact on libido. So it's all sort of driven by, a lot of different things, including our emotional state.
And then is it fair to say that libido is just the feeling of wanting to have sex, basically?
Yeah. That desire for sex, that part of you that's like, oh, I could go for some right now, or like, not so much.
So, and something that happens to, and I think this is an idea I would like to also talk about, is that this whole idea of mismatched libidos, and then maybe sometimes what can happen is that, you have a partner, a long-term partner, and maybe tonight you don't feel like it, and the next night also you don't feel like it, right? And then maybe there can be this idea that maybe, like you just don't have the same level of sex drive. But maybe it's just a matter of something external that's going on, like you were mentioning, like the stress, like the emotional state, maybe if they're sick or something like that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, different people have different baselines to their libido. So one person's baseline might be more intense than another person's, and that doesn't make either person's libido right or wrong, good or bad, more positive or more negative. But desire discrepancy can definitely interrupt couples' ability to kind of get on the same page. And with a little bit of open communication and transparency and collaboration, they can find solutions for that really allow them to work around where there are mismatched libidos or desire discrepancies. No two people have exactly the same libido, right? And it's sort of hard to expect that we would want to be sexual at exactly the same time as our partner every single time, right? We're not always hungry at the same time. We're not always sleepy at the same time. We don't always want to watch the same shows at the same time. So why would we want to have sex at the same time every time? Right? We're diverse. And when we honor that, it frees us up from shame and fear so we can just get more collaborative and problem solve more effectively.
Yeah, because you made me think of something, which is this idea that's a little bit outdated already, but some people still have it, which is how women are supposed to be always ready to have sex with their husbands, much like if that was supposed to be their duty, right?
Right. Yeah, I do not endorse that.
Not at all. And I think that it's very nice to, because I think this maybe also has to do with, and maybe you found it on clients that you work with, that even today, women, even though nobody has told them that, in a way, women could actually get that messaging from,
Mm-hmm.
around. And sometimes they might even feel bad themselves that they are not able to show up, in that way.
Totally. And the funny thing about that, and not funny, haha, but sort of funny, tragic, is that when anybody has this sort of burden of expectation put on them to be sexual, it usually has an inverse effect on libido and desire, right? So if I believe that my partner expects me to be sexual, it's going to take a lot of the fun out of it, and my libido will likely plummet even further. Right. So that sort of expectation that a lot of women are told implicitly and explicitly about can be a huge factor in why they're struggling to find motivation or interest in being sexual with their partner.
Yeah. And that's something that we should keep in mind a lot more often. And I think something that is good to, because even with masculinity, that applies, because then what happens with the way we see masculinity in at least what people tend to call this toxic idea of masculinity, that it's very much spread around the media and society, is that a real man is supposed to be hypersexual and want to have sex all the time. So at the same time, it's not only for women that these things happen, it also happens for men within the gender stereotype that they have been assigned.
Right. I mean, I think, and I love that you put that in air quotes, right? Because there is this sort of expectation that I think a lot of men have for themselves based on their own relationship to masculinity, that they should always want to be sexual because men are quote unquote, sexually virile. And that's a part of what can sometimes be called performative or precarious masculinity, right? If I don't want to have sex, maybe I'm not really as manly as I think I am, is kind of that unconscious dialogue. Whereas women are often told that they shouldn't want to be sexual. They should protect their sexuality, but they're expected to give it to their partner, in sort of those old hegemonic gender roles. So it can be a really frustrating situation for everybody because many women organically feel far more in touch with their sexuality. And many men feel like, yeah, I'm not really into it in this moment. And I don't want to feel pressure to be into it to prove that I'm a man.
Yeah. That's a very freeing thought as well. Because everybody can be like, you know what? I don't feel like it tonight. And it's like, it's fine. It should be fine. We shouldn't.
Exactly.
And I think another dimension of that is that we shouldn't take it personal, because I think the more we can normalize the fact that libido actually changes, over time, and for a lot of reasons, as you've mentioned, people can more easily just say, like, I don't really want to do it today. And it's not about you. I love you. I'm married to you. I live with you, or whatever it is. But it's just not about you. So, and then we've been talking about two specific gender like stereotypes or roles mainly.
Sure.
But before we move on to talk a little bit more about that, what are some maybe what's some advice that you would give to couples who are maybe struggling right now to, as you said, get on the same page when it comes to sex drive?
I mean, that sort of varies depending on the couple. But I think really creating time to speak with each other openly, honestly, really from a place of curiosity can get you a lot closer to finding a middle ground when you're not really sure why your desire is so discrepant or what happened or what changed in your sex lives. But I also think it's really normal for couples to go through these ebbs and flows. And so when you start to separate your sex life from being a commentary on the quality of your relationship, and you start to think that, sex is an activity that we co-create together, I think people are a little bit more liberated to get back into that co-creation instead of feeling like, oh, we're not having as much sex as I would like, or I think we should have, or as we used to. So something must be terribly wrong. Not necessarily. We could just be going through a shift in your relationship that makes sense actually for where you are.
Yeah. And I guess this applies, what you've just said applies in the context of a relationship that's already there and established. But there is also an idea that I personally feel very, or at least it sparks my curiosity, which is this idea of how mismatched libidos can be a deal breaker. Like if you meet somebody and you don't see them being, like as sexual as you maybe expected would like. But what are your thoughts on that? Does it have to be a deal breaker?
It doesn't have to be, but I think it depends on how the people in the relationship prioritize sex in terms of it being something that's really important to them. Some couples, it's not the most important element of their relationship. So a desire discrepancy may not signal as much of a fear response or a curiosity even. For some couples, sex is one of their biggest priorities. It's one of their most weighted needs. And if there's a huge discrepancy there and they can't find a way to work through that, then it could be a deal breaker. And again, I think if you bump into that, it's okay. And it's also really important to handle those conversations with care and respect for the fact that nobody's broken, bad, or wrong if they want more or less sex than you do.
Amen. That's so important. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you have any thoughts, just like very quickly, on what the words could be? Because I feel like we all struggle a lot to find the right words to say something. So do you have thoughts on that?
I mean, again, it so depends on the couple and the way that they communicate, and words that might be, words that are conducive to productive conversations might be different for one couple or another couple. True. But, starting with something like, I'd really love if we could set aside some time this week to talk about sex. Is there a time that's good for you? Can be a really gentle way to get the conversation going. And I come from a place of curiosity and collaboration being my primary goals when I'm talking with people about this. So, it really can sound like, what for you is the best outcome? What's your ideal frequency or kind of sex? Are you open to hearing mine? Okay, it looks like we're closer than maybe we thought, or we're further away than we thought. Again, using language that doesn't judge, doesn't shame, doesn't make you or me the enemy, right? Again, you're not good, bad, right, wrong, broken or not broken. You just have differences, and that is okay. And so when we stop making each other the enemy and start kind of trying to approach this from the same team, solutions are a lot more available.
I love that. Yeah, it comes down to being empathetic with other people, because just the baseline there is understand that the experience of life that you have is not the same that the other person will have.
Yeah.
And I think I always say this, that I feel like in relationships, even when you're from the same city, from the same place, it's like you're trying to agree between a Japanese and, like a Colombian or American person. It's like, it's amazing how we still get together and actually stay together when we can be so different. And that's at the same time very beautiful. So we were talking about, we talked a little bit about female and male stereotypes, but I'm also a little bit curious about, what have you maybe found in your work, working with people, when it comes to gender stereotypes in a broader sense, in not even gender, but stereotypes in general. Example, people from Latin America tend to be very, over sexualized and then expected to have higher libido. Sometimes higher libido than a white woman, right? Because, it's just a stereotype. What have you found? And maybe, have you seen that reflected in people you've worked with?
Of course. We have this really unruly problem as humans to make a whole bunch of assumptions about everything.
Yeah.
And certainly making assumptions about other people when it comes to sex is not is not off limits, unfortunately. So people do get fetishized depending on whether they belong to different groups of people and whether they're a part of that group or part of another group outside of that group. So I think there are a lot of misunderstandings and a lot of assumptions that people make about someone's relationship to sex or their libido in general, or the kind of sex that they might like based on how they've how they've understood a particular group, or the stories that they've made up or have been told about different groups. So yeah, women who share a certain appearance, for example, might be categorized as women who have higher desire or higher libido, versus women who share a different appearance might be unfairly categorized as women with low desire or no desire. We see this happen a lot when we talk about things like the Madonna whore complex. And, this is something I've been doing a lot of writing about lately, how women are really bifurcated into groups of people who are either sort of lovable and desexualized or fuckable and over-sexualized. And so depending again on the assumptions and the ways in which people are socially conditioned, they might have all kinds of misrepresentations about people's relationship to libido and desire.
And have you seen that affect, either have you seen that affect people whom you've worked with?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe what would be your invitation for people who might maybe have grown up to see that their group of people they belong to is usually put into those boxes?
Yeah. I work with a lot of women, for example, who are currently or who have been engaged in sex work, and they are often wrongly stereotyped as people who have incredibly high libidos. And certainly they can at different points in their lives or different points in the day or with different partners, right? But there's sort of this assumption that because this is their profession, that their libido must be sky high. And so when that isn't true, they often face a lot of frustration from a partner who may have expected them to engage in a frequency of sex that met their fantasy. Right. And so when that happens, I really invite people to, one, remember that as humans, we fill in the blanks a lot with all kinds of assumptions that are super faulty. And when you come front and center with an assumption that you've made about someone, whether it's about their sexual desire or anything else, just own it and walk it back. And it's okay to say, oh, I didn't really think about that. And I appreciate you sharing with me that that's not your truth, right? And just reframe, regroup, and challenge yourself. There's growth in that, there's honor in that, and there's freedom in that. Because when you start to realize how you've been misrepresenting people in your minds, you have the ability to find other like-minded folks that maybe fell outside of a smaller group of people than you assumed.
I think I also hear you saying that if you are the person who's on the other side there, who's the person who's being misrepresented or who's being assigned wrong ideas about what their libido is, I think I'm hearing that you're also inviting to communicate that.
Yes.
And I think that's a challenge, because I think a lot of people or we just tend to carry this, and then sometimes because we think that certain things are expected of us, we don't really feel encouraged to talk about them, tell them to our partners.
Yeah. I mean, it can be really challenging when your partner's coming at you with a lot of expectations because of some demographic, status that you possess. And you've got to set those boundaries and let them know what your truth is. But I do invite people to do that when it is safe to do that. And if it doesn't feel safe to do that, to extricate themselves from that situation when they can do so safely. There's a lot of entitlement that comes with sexual desire and libido, and you never have to be sexual when you don't want to be. So you get to set those boundaries when people have an erroneous assumption about you or your desire, or your libido, or your willingness.
Yeah. I think, thank you. That's awesome. And also it makes me think a little bit about consent, because in a way, I think when we have so many expectations around, it's like our consent kind of comes a little bit coerced, because we don't really, maybe we don't really want to, but we're saying yes. So yeah, consent becomes interesting, I guess, an interesting thing to think about when something like that happens. It's just how can we honor people's full ability to actually say yes to sex, and actually do it enthusiastically. And then with this whole idea of having, different maybe libidos, I think there is also something very interesting to dive into, which is asexuality versus what low libido is. So I guess the first question would be, what's the difference? How do you know if you have one or the other?
That's a great question. First, I want to say that it's really for each person to define their own sexuality. So I'm not here telling people this particular definition fits for everyone, right? I just want to be really clear about that. But in general, people who identify as asexual tend to not really be interested about sex. I heard this great analogy, and I'm trying to remember exactly how it went. But folks who are asexual, if we think about sex like akin to pizza or broccoli, it's not that they hate it. They just don't really care. They're like, meh. They might do it once in a while, but they're just not all that interested in it. I mean, maybe pizza's not the best analogy because many people love pizza, but broccoli.
Maybe broccoli.
Right. Somebody who has low desire might be like, oh, I usually love broccoli, but I'm just not interested lately. Yeah, maybe I'm sick of it, or maybe I'm just not in the mood for it right now, or my stomach's been hurting recently, and broccoli's just, I'm going to pass today. Right? So I think low libido really recognizes a shift. You recognize there are other periods of time when your libido has been higher and you've been really interested in being sexual, curious about it, engaging, enthusiastic, and now it's sort of lower. And folks who identify as asexual might have never or incredibly infrequently had those experiences. They might feel more apathy than anything else about being sexual, or indifference.
And you just mentioned something that I think it's key to discuss when you talk about asexuality, and that is, you said they might do it once in a while.
Yeah, so, they might engage in sex, but they're still like pretty disinterested in it for the most part. You might eat broccoli and you might be like, if I never eat broccoli again, I don't care. Right? And if that's been your constant, or for the most part, constant attitude your whole life, that when you rule out other medical conditions and you don't have any distress about not being interested in it, that's more likely asexuality. Somebody who has low desire may feel more distress around that. They may think, oh, I really want, actually, I miss it. I want to be sexual. I miss that connection I had with my partner or with a partner. They may not feel that as intensely, but they're likely going to have some sort of higher level of interest, curiosity, or a want to want it.
A want to want it.
Yeah.
Okay. But again, similarly to how I've been asking you before, do you have any advice for someone who might be potentially entering a relationship with someone who's asexual? Because again, I guess it could be a deal breaker if you want it to be, but if you don't want it to be, how do you navigate it, right?
So I don't think there's a really cookie cutter way to answer that question, because people are so diverse. And one person's asexuality might look a little bit different or a lot different than another person's asexuality. And their partner's levels of desire and libido may look very different. And also their sort of relationship orientation and the boundaries that are important to them and the safety needs that they have might be very different. So some couples might say, yeah, this actually works for me. It's great. We're polyamorous. I'm asexual, but I have romantic connections with people, and there's alignment, right? They get enough of their needs met together, and they get enough of their needs met in other ways, and it works for them. Some folks might have a really different way of trying to find a solution, and that might include being sexual together and finding a cadence that works for them both. It might include engaging in the consumption of pornography and in enjoying sex in a solo way or even in a partnered way, but not in perhaps a penetrative way. So I think there are as many solutions as there are opportunities to get creative to find them.
I love what you just said. And also that idea of maybe being sexual, but not in a penetrative way, because I think, in society, we've also put a lot of pressure to that specific type of sex.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're in relationship is like, I think I saw like a meme the other day that said something like, sometimes it's not sex what you crave the closeness
Mm-hmm.
and the intimacy of the experience more than the actual, physical act of being with this other person. So I love that, because it opens up a lot of possibilities. You could just, like kiss for a long time, make out. And that can also count as sex, because I think the other part of that is that different people define sex differently as well.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's very interesting. And then I think the other, I remembered my question from earlier, and it was,
Okay.
how do you think that the media is responsible for maybe, or maybe how can we help people be more aware that asexuality, and for that matter, any other different interpretations and feelings about sex exist, so that people can actually own their identities more easily?
Yeah, well, I know this is a really hot button issue right now, especially with several states passing legislation to actually intervene on sex education in schools. But if I were queen of the universe, there would be
I love the answers that start like that.
There would be a lot of changes, but one of them, and one of the things that I would love to see happen quickly, is secular sex education that is age appropriate, starting early in every single school, in every single state, in every single country in this world. Because when we have the information to understand how our bodies work, how to talk about our interests or our boundaries, how to navigate conversations with each other, how to feel like we're congruent with the way that we experience ourselves and the way that we describe ourselves to other people. These things are empowering, and they're necessary for people to go on and develop a healthy relationship with sex that then aligns with the other value systems that they bring into the totality of who they are. Not giving people this information doesn't prevent them from being curious about it. It doesn't prevent them from exploring. It prevents them from doing so in ways that are safer, less risky, and less empowered. And so, not teaching people about this, in my opinion, and it is my humble clinical opinion, rooted only in 16 years of practice and study. But just that. My humble opinion is that not giving people this information is not a solution that is sustainable and doesn't help people reach the outcomes that they're looking for in reducing STI transition, unwanted pregnancies, or behavior that does clash with people's values. When we empower people with education, they're able to make sense of things. When we trust people to make decisions with information, they make decisions that typically align with the values that they want to keep. And so I would love to see that be something that is more advocated for. It's what the research supports as being sustainable and effective in the long run. So my hope is that we as a culture, as a collective, will create more opportunities for secular sex education and less censorship of sex education on social media platforms so that people, again, can have access to free information. And then, parents can help their kids have conversations about the values of your family and how to make sense of any information that might not fit within your value system. That is the beautiful, rigorous work of being a parent.
Yeah, and you said something that is so beautiful, because you said you've been talking about how when we provide people with this information, they can actually integrate it into who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the biggest issues when it comes to sex education, is that we teach it so separately, that we only focus on, you might get sick, and we focus on penetrative sex, and this is what it is. When in reality, when you just bring sexuality and you actually see it in the context of the whole person, then those things are that's why sometimes people feel like those things unmatched, like my values and what I want to do. And then it's like, but because, as you mentioned, maybe we're just not providing people with the opportunity to create that sense of self, sexual self, along the self in general.
Yeah. Yes, it's so true. And when we make things taboo, guess what? People want to explore it more, and they'll do it in clandestine or secret ways. So it doesn't really solve any problem. It just creates a lot of shame, and that shame amplifies the desire for more secrecy, which prevents people from getting help when they need it. It prevents people from making educated decisions about their health. It prevents people from talking openly about how to reduce the transmission of STIs, unwanted pregnancy, like all of the things that are really important for us to make smart decisions about our bodies and our pleasure. And pleasure is such an important component of our vitality as humans, sexual or otherwise.
Yeah, that's true. Because it's also pleasure is so important, as you've mentioned too, because in the end, that's what our lives are, like we do all these other things that we have to do, but in the end, it's like, ideally we would always be experiencing pleasure if we could. We would always do things that are pleasurable for us. And part of what you're proposing opens up is a possibility for people to make decisions that they actually feel well about, because that's the other part of the story. Like, if you don't have enough information, you might think that you are actually making the choice that you want and that is best for you and that you're going to enjoy. And then it turns out that it wasn't that way. So yeah, that's so important. Definitely voting for you for Queen of the Universe.
Thank you very much.
The campaign just started today, so all right. So there is this other thing that I think it's very important to talk about, and that people might not know so much about. Maybe they might, but it's important to talk about. And it's the link between sex drive or libido and depression, and then also antidepressants.
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned this earlier. Our emotional state plays a huge role in our levels of desire and our libido. So when we think about our emotions and their relationship with our nervous system, we want to remember that our nervous system can get upregulated, like when we get angry, anxious, nervous, excited, and all of those things can increase libido. But some of those emotions can decrease libido for people. Some people's libido goes down when they feel more nervous or anxious. For other people, it acts like an amplifier for desire and arousal. And conversely, for some folks, when they feel sad or tired, they may not really be interested in sex. And those are some of the key components of depression, right? Having more of a dysphoric mood state, low energy, lethargic, anhedonia, not being interested in the things that you used to be interested in before. So as you can imagine, A depressed nervous system tends to downregulate and loses vitality. So for a lot of folks, depression is like pumping the brakes on libido. And the thing that's a bummer is that the medication that often helps with depression, and I'm not a prescriber or a physician, so I just want to make that very clear, but it's very well known that a lot of SSRIs, although they can help with, eliminating some of those symptoms of depression or reducing them, they often can get in the way of people's desire for sex or their libido. So, it can be very frustrating for people. And sometimes there are other augmenting medications that folks can take or other medications without those side effects that can be helpful in the reduction of symptoms. But again, I'm not a physician or a prescriber, so that's a conversation to have with your doctor and or your psychiatrist to find out what could work for you to help ameliorate symptoms and restore your sex drive.
All right. And then I think to wrap up, I think it because it applies in, for everyone, everywhere, I would say, what are ways in which people can start tackling their libido so they can get a better sense of, oh, it ebbs and flows, so it's okay. Mm-hmm. It's just a phase.
Well, I think if you're curious about your libido and you want to learn more, talking with a sex therapist can be a great place to start because they can help you understand what has been your baseline. They can help refer you to other providers to rule out any medical conditions or interaction effects of different medication. And they can help sort of get more of a holistic picture of your relationship if you're in one, or any other mental health concerns that might be, getting in the way of your libido or exacerbating it and creating an uptick of libido that suddenly you want some answers around. So I think that can be a really great start. Educating yourself, of course, eating a diet that's healthy for you and your body type. Exercising again in a way that's healthy for you and your body, and really kind of trying to maximize your health, which can, in fact, help boost your libido naturally. It creates energy in the body, and usually gives folks confidence, which can help with improving libido too. So all of these things are intertwined.
Yeah. I'd say that what I've learned from today's conversation is that libido and all other aspects of life are intertwined. Yes. And it's important to, pay attention to all of them when you're thinking of just exploring or understanding your libido a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think that's so important because I see it happening. I've seen it happening from my perspective in my family, in my life. It's like this. And people joke about it and everything, how, women, you get kids and then, they're not interested anymore in having sex, but, what's behind that?
But why not, right? And yeah. So often I hear from cisgender women in straight relationships, they feel more like a parent to their partner than they do a partner. And that is not sexy.
Exactly.
It's not sexy. So if that's the dynamic, creating more balance in your relationship can be a really fast way to start repairing resentments and to create more vitality together.
All right. Well, Dr. Kate, thank you so much for being here with us. Is there anything that you want to let the audience know? Anything you want to maybe promote? Anything you're working on? Or how can they find you or contact you if they want to work with you?
Sure. So my practice has clinicians in 5 different states. We're in New York, we're in Florida, Illinois, Colorado, and California for folks who are looking for therapists, couples therapists, sex therapists, regular therapists. They can reach us at modernintimacy.com. And we have a bunch of blogs that are free and they talk all about libido and different aspects of mental health, sexuality, and relationships. So feel free to jump on our website, as a free resource too. And on social media, they can find me on TikTok and Instagram at Dr. Kate Balestrieri. think that's about it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today, and thank you for sharing your experience with us.
Yeah, thank you so much again for the invitation and for sparking this really great conversation.
Thank you. So, see you next time in another episode of Sex Talks with Diana.
Sex Talks with Diana is produced by MySexpire, an educational platform meant to empower people like you to take command of your sexual story. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, YouTube, and Spotify at MySexpire. Visit our website and join our e-letter at mysexpire.org, and support our work by joining our Patreon. If you enjoyed this talk, please share it with a friend to continue the conversation. See you next time!